Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon when you're watching this video lecture. After the completion of first three chapters in Economics for Finance concerning the national income, public finance, and money market, let us move on to the fourth chapter in EFF, that is related to international trade. In this fourth chapter, we'll start with unit 1, which is about various theories of international trade. And in this unit, what we are going to discuss are basically to define what is international trade and what is the difference between internal trade and international trade. Also, what are the arguments for and against this international trade, and then various theories related to the international trade, including the mercantilist theory and the theory of absolute advantage, theory of comparative advantage, and other things related to other theories like MTT, modern theory of trade, new trade theory, etc. These are the various aspects in this particular unit. And before we enter into the theories related to international trade, first of all, let us understand what is international trade. It's a simple, direct thing anybody can normally also understand and define, nothing special. International trade is the exchange of goods and services as well as resources between countries, not within the country, but among the countries. So this international trade involves the transactions between the residents of different countries. That's what is simply international trade defined. How is it different from domestic trade or internal trade? Unlike domestic trade or internal trade, which involves the exchange of goods and services within the domestic territory of a country using domestic currency, the speciality of international trade is it involves the transactions in multiple currencies. So the currencies of each country is not same. So naturally, when there is a international trade which is involving exchange of goods and services among different countries, they will inevitably use different currencies. Multiple currencies are going to be used in the transactions involving international trade. And because of that, this international trade also generates greater complexity when compared with internal trade or domestic trade. Why is that? Since this international trade involves heterogeneity of the customers and currencies. Heterogeneity means variety. Different types of customers and currencies will be there. Differences in legal systems will be there from country to country. And elaborate documentation will be there when we talk about imports and exports. And various restrictions will be placed upon by countries on the other countries sometimes. And not only that, infrastructural, logistical issues like shipping and transportation also will be very complex when we talk about international trade. Domestic trade or internal trade within the domestic territory of a country will have its own complexities, but if this itself is a complex system, imagine the entire world having a trade among different countries will naturally have a bigger complex system. Reasons for such complexity are as given: heterogeneity of the customers and currencies, differences in the legal systems, elaborate documentation, various restrictions that are placed by countries on the other countries like tariffs, customs duties, quantitative restrictions, etc., which we'll see in the next unit. And then also issues related to logistics like shipping and transportation. These are the differences between internal trade and international trade, we can say, and the definition of international trade. So question can be asked like, what is international trade and how is it different from internal trade? This is the answer that we should write. Now there is another possibility of a question: what are the advantages of international trade? You don't have to write all of them, but definitely depending upon the number of marks, you have to write most of them. First thing first, international trade is a very powerful stimulus to the economic efficiency. That itself can be a question. How international trade can be affecting or stimulating the economic efficiency? Then also you will write the same. Yes, it is a powerful stimulus to the economic efficiency, and definitely international trade contributes to economic growth. How? Because of various reasons. Because it facilitates extended division of labor. So division of labor is one thing, definitely that is going to be very crucial in the international trade. For example, let us say somebody in the Switzerland country have historically great skill in manufacturing watches, chocolates, etc. Or somebody, let us say in Bangladesh, is having a great expertise in manufacturing cloth. Or somebody in India might be having a lot of expertise in weaving type of cloth products, or even let us say jute products, like that. So every country has their own specializations. Certain country is more famous for some things, so certain other countries are famous for some other things. So each country, each citizens of each country will have some specialization, so that facilitates division of labor. For example, if you take the current world situation, definitely India's contribution to the software services or internet or information technology services is very vast, very huge, no doubt in that. Live example of that is the two biggest corporations in the world are having Indian CEOs. That is one of the examples, not that just because two people we are great. That itself shows how great contribution Indians have done in the field of this information technology. Yes, that is one thing which we are good at. Maybe we are not good at manufacturing something else. At the same time, when our scientists and engineers are able to send rockets to the space, this we are okay. Sending rockets to the space, we are good. And even other countries are coming to us and taking our services, sending rockets to the space. ISRO is definitely one of the most famous and prestigious organizations in the entire world, competing with bigger organizations like NASA. Even NASA actually has more than 40% Indian scientists, according to some other news report. So definitely yes, in the space technology also we have very good thing. But the same situation is not the case when we manufacture certain other basic things, or even the things that don't go into sky but just they fly. For example, do we manufacture aeroplanes? No, we don't. Boeing, Airbus, those people will manufacture. Do we manufacture helicopters ourselves? Recently we started, particularly from military point of view, but that also is not like very great success. It is, but not comparable to the world standard. So the point is, in certain areas, maybe our expertise is bigger, or in certain areas, maybe not. They say, it's not reality or not, I don't know, because we never went there. They say a 6th standard student in Japan can actually assemble a watch. A school kid in Japan has that much of ability or knowledge that is acquired through the education, ki if you give him some spare parts of a watch, he can assemble a watch. Can we imagine that from our kids in India? Rarely it will be, not definitely part of our education, because our education is more about memorizing and vomiting in the exams rather than actually applying it. Our application starts at a much later stage than from the childhood stage, unfortunately. But yes, that is reality. So the point is, that is true. In certain areas we are good, in certain areas we are not good. That is natural also, nothing wrong in that. What does international trade do? Is it will make this division of labor work for the benefit of the entire humankind. So if one country has a good production of rice with its resources and skillfulness, then it can export to other countries where there is no resources or there is no expertise of that particular sector or segment. So international trade definitely facilitates such kind of division of labor. Nowadays with the modern technology, there is no need that people have to be physically present at the same place also. Internationally the communication is going, and somebody who is sitting in India can communicate with somebody who is in US, and both of them might be working on the same project, but still the results are coming out. So division of labor is quite possible with the international trade. That is one of the positive points of globalization, we can call it, or international trade to be specific. Then this results in the economies of large scale production. Definitely yes, economies of scale will be more when the production quantities are huge. Common sense, we know that from costing also. As the number of units produced increases, cost per unit decreases. That is simply the economies of scale. China could do that very effectively. Sometimes it is like a mystery or a wondering thing. How can they manufacture at that much low cost per unit? Because of the scale, because they almost became the factory to the entire world. Of course, not anymore after the coronavirus, but still, it has not become something zero also. That is why China is called a factory to the world, India is called office of the world. So we are service providers, they are producers of goods. We are better in services. Okay, whatever it is, goods and services put together only the world will run. But when it comes to the scale, definitely the largest scale production happens in the countries like China. And are they manufacturing that much scale for only themselves? They themselves are huge with 1.3 billion people already. But not only for themselves, they are even manufacturing for the entire world. Because of that, what happened? The production became so huge that cost per unit is very less, and then that will become cheaper in the international market. So similar quality or same quality of goods are available at a cheaper price because of that. Is it not economic efficiency? Okay, for some time we have to come out of our boundary level nationalistic thought process of everything about our country in the domestic territory only. When we are looking at a global scenario, we have to think at global level as a global citizen, not just as an Indian. Our love towards the country or our affection or our inclination will not go anywhere just because we are understanding the international trade. It will be there. But the point is, if you take the entire globe as one unit, is it not increasing the economic efficiency or not? Yes. Because earlier, more resources were required to produce the same goods. Now, because of the huge large scale operation that is happening, and which is a direct result of international trade, the resource utilization has become lesser. With the lesser resources, you are able to produce more. That is efficiency, which is possible only due to international trade. If it is not there, definitely that much level of large scale production would not have happened. So that is how definitely the international trade results in economies of scale, economies of large scale production. That is one of the advantages. And another advantage is that international trade induces competition. That is also one thing we can see. When you have only goods within the country manufactured domestically, quality of that goods will be okay. But when there is a competition from the international market, naturally, because of that competition, the quality of the goods and the quality of the business practices will definitely go up, because otherwise you cannot compete. The international big players coming with huge infrastructure and huge logistical advantage and technological advancement and business practices which they have been implementing at a much higher scale throughout the world, how can a small person or a small trader compete with them? Or a person who has never had any experience of international trade compete with them? Not possible. So we have to step up also. When they are coming, we have to also do our own improvements in our quality of products as well as business practices. So the competition naturally brings out better quality is the general principle, and that is also one of the advantages of international trade. And naturally, international trade gives access to the new markets for the outputs, and new materials also can be taken from other countries as inputs. Without that, Every country will not have all the resources. For example, India depends on almost 90% on other countries for its crude oil requirements, petroleum requirements. India doesn't have that much of petrol or petroleum that we use. So we have to import. Imagine if there is no international trade. We have to run on bullock carts back to old civilization. All our cars and all our bikes become useless. So such a resource spread in the world is definitely not equal. Naturally, that requires countries to export certain things and import certain things. Of course, this is not happening now. Even before Christ also, there was a lot of international trade that was happening, including Indus Valley civilization and other great civilizations of the past, Mesopotamian or Egyptian or Chinese particularly, have been there, not now. China is not about only the latest large scale production that they are doing. Earlier also, they had some control on certain types of products like silk, for example. Silk used to be only from China. They used to export from China to almost Europe, that is called Silk Route popularly. And tea, they used to export. Later on, we also started manufacturing in India. Like that, different things. Some countries will have their own expertise. We used to have our own expertise. India used to have our own expertise. India is the hub for spices. Everybody in the world, they are dependent on India for spices. They used to come for that. Without this, there is nothing that is added as a taste to the food. Other countries didn't know that. And for example, cotton. Cotton is something which is not directly Indian, but still, it is the biggest producer. It has been on the forefront earlier also. Again, it's only there in some of the history books that first time when some Europeans came to India, they have written in their diaries, oh, this is some such a great country where the wool is not on the sheep, but it is on the trees. They thought it is wool, they didn't know it is cotton. So that is something which they didn't know earlier. Now they came to know when they came to India. So new materials like cotton, how they could know? Because of international trade. It's a different story whether they really did only business, later on they started occupying us, ruling us. That is all political thing. But only from a business point of view, because of international trade, new markets were open, new materials were available for them. It's a different story. Once again, it is a disadvantage of it, wherein certain powerful countries will definitely exploit the other poorer countries. That is the other side of it. When we are writing advantages, we have to only look at that side. From this side, yes, international trade provides access to new markets and new materials. That is a good thing. Then, it also augments the scope for mechanization and specialization. Also, when the scale increases, mechanization also increases naturally. Specialization also increases. Without specialization, you cannot compete with the international market. So that is also another thing which is augmented or supported by international trade. And because of this, it can contribute to the human resource development. Because of different people traveling from one country to another country, dealing with business. Basically, why people used to travel from one country to another country? Not even now, even like say 2500, 3000 years back, for trade only. Otherwise, why they should go to some other place? So, they learned other languages, they learned other customs, they came to know new things, they came to know new materials, new resources, and they came to know new practices. Of course, later on, new religions and customs, whatever these things. From there, even if we look at the current day scenario, without international trade, how come everybody or most of the people in the world can be knowledgeable in this technology world? Okay, we are all using laptops, smartphones and all. Is it not adding to our knowledge or not? Definitely yes. Without that, probably it is difficult to imagine how the knowledge acquisition process can run in the current scenario at least. But in doing so, overall development of the human resources is happening in the entire world because of this international trade. Of course, when you say trade, don't think of only goods. That includes services. The software that we are using, the computer that we are using, the operating system that we are using, None of this is invented by us. It is all coming from somewhere. Somebody has invented, and we are using them for our benefit. We don't care who purchased, who manufactured it, or let us say who invented it. That those days are also gone. Are we getting the best out of it or not? Are we getting the best benefit of it or not? Yes. Not only us, entire world is getting benefit out of it. That is how international trade contributes to the human resource development. And not only that, international trade provides greater stimulus to innovative services. A lot of innovation happened because of this only. So many innovative services have been introduced, like even in banking services or insurance products or financial services, capital markets. Each of them is connected in the world now. As they say, the world has become a global village, a uh, small sphere, we can say. But yes, how this was all possible? Because of innovative services. Everything is an innovation. Mobile phone is a great innovation. Computer itself was a great innovation. Internet, what level of innovation it is? How it has connected the world. Unbelievable. And this all happened in a very short span of life in the entire human civilization, we can say. And because of this connectivity, innovation and further things will be much faster now. So all these things will add up to economic efficiency, and that is the biggest advantage of international trade. In one word, we have to define what is the advantage of international trade. It gives a powerful stimulus to the economic efficiency and contributes to the economic growth. That is the advantage. How all these things are contributing to that: division of labor, economies of scale, competition, availability of new materials and access to new markets, mechanization, specialization, human resource development, and more innovative services being added on a daily basis. These are all advantages of international trade, we can say. Now looking at the other side of the coin, there will be always advantages means disadvantages also. What could be the disadvantages of international trade? First thing first, the possible negative labor market outcomes. This is the biggest thing. Once again, because of labor saving technological changes that depress the demand for unskilled workers, and loss of the laborers' bargaining power happens. Downward pressure on the wages happens. All these things we can see in India also. For example, because of the mechanization that has happened in the textile industry, I am not even talking about current India, even in British India, because of the machine made cloth in England, of course using our cotton only, raw materials they used to take from India to England, they used to manufacture cloths on machines at a very low cost, and then they used to sell that cloth to us at a cheaper price than what our weavers who are actually doing it with physical labor can sell. Skill wise or even talent wise, our weavers are definitely, undoubtedly one of the best skilled workers in the entire world. But what is the use of that skill now when there is a machine which is able to do a similar job which earlier a person had to use it to do? So naturally, that has put them, so many of the people in the textile industry, particularly the weavers, into distress. Thousands of the people, lakhs of people committed suicide even in British India. Even after independence of India also, that sector has always been very much under distress. That is a clear outcome of where we have cheaper products available at a good quality, and how that is happening because of the labor saving technological changes, not here, somewhere else, and that can be imported at a cheaper price. So the work that is done by these laborers is not valued properly. And if this is the fate of skilled workers, imagine the fate of unskilled workers. They are no more useful. Actually, the recent reports have made it clear that almost like 30 to 40 types of job descriptions are going to be redundant in future, including welders. Welding is going to be done by robots only mostly in the next 5 to 10 years. Welders will become jobless. Why welders are required when the welding can be done by a robot? So certain jobs like that will be gone. Thankfully, accountant itself is not there in that as a job that will be gone. But other things will be gone. Maybe if laws change in that way, tax practitioners or tax advisors job might be gone. Even lawyers for that matter nowadays are not able to really gain good incomes because most of the things are available online almost free of cost or at a cheaper price. Let us say if anybody wants to go and draft a rental agreement, earlier what they used to do, they used to meet a lawyer and they used to ask him, boss, I need a format of a rental agreement, can you please give me? Oh, that lawyer will say, I will give you tomorrow, I will have to work on that. He will not do anything, he will copy paste old agreement, changing some names and all. He will give us and take some fees. That used to happen earlier. Now not required, you can download it in one click. Gone, no? That much of work and that much of money or income earning capacity of the lawyer is gone. These are only few examples. If you keep on thinking about any sector, this international trade definitely will have a negative labor market outcomes. And that reduces the bargaining power of the laborers because they are always in the receiving end, begging end. Earlier when the laborers had some power, they had unions, strikes and all that to exercise their bargaining power. Now that bargaining power is gone, only begging power remained. That also if somebody cares, otherwise that also is useless. And wages will go down. That is another important aspect. Wages again, you should not look at nominal rates. We have to look at the real wages. Just to take an example, software employees in somewhere in the 1999 where Y2K problem was there and lot of people entered into the software industry that period only, 97 to 2000 we can say. That 3 to 4 years was a golden period for Indian engineers who entered into that field. Good for them, and they used to earn approximately on an average 14,000 to 20,000 rupees per month salary that time. 14,000 to 20,000 per month was the salary that time for the software engineers who just joined. We are talking freshers. We are not talking some great experienced people. That was the salary in 99. Now we are talking about how many years now? 21 years almost. Now also the software employees starting salary is this much only for a fresher. If campus interviews are conducted, all these TCS, Infosys and all, they will take fresh engineers. They will offer them this only. So okay, let us take even upper band also, 20,000 only, that's all. They call it 2.5 lakhs package. What package is that? That person will not get hardly 15 to 16,000 also per month in hand. 21 years back salaries are equal to the current day salaries, but is money value same 21 years back and now? Definitely not. So what does it indicate? There is a huge downward movement on the wages, and we are looking at a white collar job like a software engineer or a computer engineer, not even the other hard jobs or physical labor jobs. That is altogether a different story. So what happens? Because of this international trade, labor market outcomes will definitely be negative. Lot of jobs will be lost. New technologies will make the unskilled workers redundant, useless, and that will reduce their wages also, that will reduce their bargaining power also. That is a clear, visible disadvantage that we can see in India because all this happened in front of our eyes. So at least we can feel that disadvantage in front of us only. Even from the past 10 years if you observe, definitely the international players' role in India has increased, and that has put a lot of pressure on the domestic traders, and a lot of unskilled workers also became jobless. So that is a big problem or limitation we can say of international trade. And second point here is the international trade is often not equally beneficial to all nations. That is an important point. Okay, we say there is going to be economic efficiency, growth and all. Next question comes, sir, okay, for whom? Growth is good. For whom? Growth will be there for those countries which are powerful. So the economic exploitation is likely to happen. India faced it from England for more than 200 years. So that is a clear indication of economic exploitation by one country on the other country, by the powerful countries on the underprivileged countries, in the disguise of international trade. How the Britishers came to India? Did they come telling that, okay, boss, we want to invade India, from tomorrow onwards we want to rule India, like that they came? No, they didn't come like that. They said, we are traders, we want your cotton, we want your spices, we have something for you, we'll sell you something. Like that they came, as traders, literally like merchants they came. Then later on started economic exploitation, and they started getting more and more politically powerful also. That was the colonial era, but that also started with international trade only. But even now, definitely the growing political power of the corporations is going to be much powerful than even a small country. So the underprivileged countries become vulnerable to the growing political power of the corporations operating globally. So you call them transnationals or multinational organizations, global corporations. They have more power than even one country. So the unprivileged or underprivileged countries cannot be in a position to deal with them or trade with them as equals. When you say trade or a negotiation, two people are talking to each other. If they are equals, that is okay. If they are not equals, then there is automatically one person is going to be exploited by the other person. So that is the problem with international trade. Since it is not always equally poised, it will have inequalities in power, and that also because of the size of the big corporations growing rapidly and very huge level they have all reached. So that is a, I can say, problem, one of the problems with international trade. Third problem or limitation or disadvantage is substantial environmental damage. Definitely yes. When you are going to the nook and corner of the world and extracting the resources, what happens naturally? All the natural resources will get exhausted, and that will have a very serious damage, negative consequences on the society at large. We can say on the earth at large, on the globe itself. Substantial environmental damage has resulted due to international trade only. Without international trade, people wanted to just have, imagine like 40-50 years back, much of Indians in the villages, they themselves have their own ecosystem. There used to be a person who makes pots, there used to be a person who has some job, somebody is a tailor, somebody is a farmer, somebody is a teacher, somebody is somebody. So they are all doing something among themselves. They don't have to damage the environment much. They don't have to. Within their village, they were okay. Okay. Equal, unequal, problems were not there. I am not telling that. Problems were always there. But now, with the advent of international trade and big multinational organizations, what they are doing throughout the world, if you see, petroleum corporations, big ones like Shell or Exxon Mobil, they are left and right extracting the petroleum from the earth, whether it is on the ground or whether it is from the sea. And coal and diamond or gold in some countries and places. All the natural resources which are there are going to be almost exhausted. So what will be remaining to the future generations? Probably a damaged globe or a damaged earth. So that is also a result of international trade becoming bigger and bigger, requirements of ours becoming bigger and bigger, more consumers, more goods, more new types of commodities that we have in front of us. How all these things are going to be manufactured? As I am talking to you, in front of me there are only commodities. There is a laptop, there is a microphone, there is a pen, there is a digital pad, there is a mouse, calculator. So many things are there. How these are all coming? Without the use of resources, they are all coming? No, they cannot. So for just look around ourselves. Most of these things are not Indian; those are imported. Second, most of these things will have a serious requirement of natural resources, which has already happened, and all that happened naturally due to international trade only. Oh, there are positive points which we discussed. When we discuss positive points, we have to look from that side. On the other side of the coin, there are serious issues also that international trade can cause damage and very serious negative consequences it might cause. That is a problem also with the international trade. Then, this is another thing, trade cycles and the associated economic crisis occurring in the different countries are likely to get transmitted rapidly to the other countries. So, not only the viruses, even the economic cycles also will carry to other countries. Classic example of that is 2008 America subprime crisis or recession in America, we can say. It started with some small thing in America, like housing loans is the root cause of that, let us say. Then, did it stop at America? No. It has affected Europe, it has affected China, it has affected Korea, it has affected almost the entire world, including India, but India was little less affected compared with other countries because our exposure to the international trade or international financial market was not as much as others. We had, but it was lesser. One way we can say we were saved then because of less connectivity with the financial markets of the world. But others, wherever there is a full-fledged capital market, financial market connectivity, all countries got really bad situation because of something that happened in America. Some pension trust in Spain, what it has to do with America? It has to give pension to the old people in Spain. But that pension trust will have investments in some of the financial instruments in America. So what happened? Anything bad happens in America will have an impact on the pension trust also, and the old people in Spain, somewhere in the village of Spain, he doesn't even know what is this 2008 and all, Lehman Brothers, all these things he doesn't know. Some old people, couple in a small village in the corner of Spain will not get pension 1 month, and he doesn't know what is the reason for it also. That much these are all related. Something happens somewhere, impact of that could be completely on some other persons without even being able to understand why it is happening. Why? Because of international trade, the economic benefits also can pass on to one country to another country. When they can pass, naturally economic crisis also can be transmitted. So, as we know, bad things transmit very quickly than the good things. So, economic crises transmit very quickly than the economic benefits and efficiencies. They will take a lot of time. Economic efficiencies, benefits and all what we looked at, they will be also there, but they will take a lot of time. But bad things, they will come very quickly. So that is a problem with international trade, disadvantage or limitation, we can say. And basically the underdeveloped or developing countries will be dependent more on the foreign nations. That impairs the economic autonomy, and sometimes even that can impair the political sovereignty of that particular underdeveloped countries or developing countries or poor countries, third world countries, whatever we can call them. Because the powerful countries with more economic power will influence them. So they will have their say, and these underdeveloped countries or developing countries may not be having that much voice. They might not be having that much of economic autonomy. That will eventually endanger the political sovereignty also. To some extent we can see that, but yes, because of our history and let us say some bit of contribution to the entire global humankind civilization, we have not reached to that level of losing our political sovereignty. That never happened. But economic autonomy is questionable. Sometimes we definitely can understand our economic autonomy is really there, or is it meeting the interests of the international players? That is questionable. A lot of instances are there where we succumb to the international players and international, you can say, corporations, and even governments. We succumb to their pressure or instructions, though not to that level of dependence. Are we not dependent on the foreign nations on many things? Yes, definitely yes. That is risky. That is risky. But once again, as I said, compared to many other countries, we have our own so many positive things as India, which will rarely have too much of negative consequences in the international arena. Our ground is reasonably solid. But other countries, smaller countries, some country in Africa will be too dependent on China. That whatever China says, that country has to do. That much of dependency is dangerous. That will be sometimes even endangering or even jeopardizing the political sovereignty of smaller or underdeveloped countries, poorer countries. That is also other disadvantage of international trade. And at the end of it, because of the international trade and basically expanding the market economy to the entire world in the name of globalization, that will or might ignore the welfare of the people, because when we look at trade, what is the ultimate objective? It is profit. We will do world wars also, we will do invasions also, we might kill millions of people also. Ultimately, for what purpose? Profit. So people will not be the ones who are at the center point. Profit will be the one that is at the center point because of the rampant development of international trade. This was clear also. This was clear even in the history when the international trade became much and much bigger in size, when the transportation became easier with the invent of steamers like ships which run on steam. Then the fight among the big countries also have become stronger and stronger, and their fights turned out to be world wars also, which our human race has experienced in the previous century and millennium. That was horrible. Crores of people have died, not just injured. Numerous people would have been injured. So all those people are people. They are not just numbers. Those are human beings. For what? For power and for profit. Of course, the profit is the one that takes to the power. That is what they thought, and that is one thing which started those type of wars also at global level, even within the countries also. When there is a too much of push towards the profits, welfare of the people may be ignored. Again, we don't know exactly really, but we hear the stories. Chinese companies transport their workers to the other countries in containers, it seems, like cattle, like sheep. How horrible. And the so-called welfare country or communist country or whatever the names they can give to themselves, namesake, if they do not have even basic respect to the human life, what kind of People's Republic it is? Namesake, it is People's Republic of China, and they are transporting people in containers like sheep, like cattle. That's what I heard. Again, I have not seen. So these are the things that happen. Welfare of the people becomes secondary or even lesser priority. Profit is the highest priority. Somehow we have to cut the costs. Somehow we have to become competitive. Somehow we have to grab more and more markets. Somehow we have to get more and more sales and more profit. What all these multinationals do? Every week they will have weekly meeting, a monthly meeting, a quarterly meeting. For what? Profits, profits, profits. In the pursuit of those profits, welfare of the people may be ignored. I am not saying all the countries or all the multinationals will ignore automatically, but at a broader level, if you see, definitely yes. When the trade is more, that too among different countries across the borders, then the scale definitely requires more focus on reducing the costs and increasing the profit. In the meantime, welfare of the people might be completely compromised, quite possible, and that is a big disadvantage of international trade from a humanitarian point of view. Like this, how many problems are there? The list is endless. We can have a day-long lecture or even discussion on this, but that is not our objective. Simply, if a question comes, what is international trade? How is it different from internal trade? We have to write this. What are the advantages of international trade, or how international trade contributes to the economic efficiency of a country? We can write this. Or economic efficiency of not just one country, to the entire world. Because of all these points, international trade is good, and because of all these points, international trade is also bad. Nothing in the world is 100% good or 100% bad. Everything will have both the sides. Our job is not to judge and decide. and take sides. It is not a binary situation, 0 or 1, either I am this side or on the other side, not like that. Those things will only happen in mythical situations, but reality is that yes, everything will have its own good points and bad points. Our job is to only know both of them, not to judge them. Judging can happen at a later stage when we become more experienced and well versed with various things happening around us. Without that, right now, only to look at both sides of the coin is our job. That's what is introduction or basic aspects of international trade, we can say. Now entering into the technical aspects of international trade, consisting of different theories of international trade. Of course, we have to read and understand each of these theories. If the question is that what are the theories of international trade, you can just write these theory names enough. What are the theories? Mercantilist theory, then the theory of absolute advantage, that is one of the theories proposed by Adam Smith. Then there is a theory of comparative advantage, there is a Ricardian theory. Then there is modern theory of trade, then there is new trade theory. There are different types of theories of international trade. Of course, all of them are promoting or telling some advantages of international trade, or explaining the nature of international trade. How international trade happens, some of the theories explain, and some of the theories explain why the international trade happens, and some of the theories also tell why the international trade should happen for the benefit of everybody. All types of things are there in these theories related to international trade. Let us start with mercantilist theory or mercantilist's view of international trade. So these are the people who are like Europe people, like we are talking about 300-400 years back at least. People from Portuguese traveled around the world, people from England and even Dutch people, French people, even Vikings, that is happening. Maybe people from Norway, Denmark, Sweden. These people are so many people, Spain, Spanish, they have traveled the world. So many powerful kingdoms or empires within the Europe, they followed this mercantilist view of international trade. So what they were thinking, or what is their view? Mercantilism means it was the policy of the Europe's great powers was based on the premise that national wealth and power are best served by increasing exports and collecting precious metals in return. That's what they wanted. What are precious metals? Naturally gold and silver. So all that they need to do is they have to produce something that others do not have and export them and collect precious metals in return. That was a mercantilist's view of international trade. Then only the national wealth and power can be best served according to them. And these mercantilists also believed that more gold and silver a country accumulates, the richer it becomes. So their focus was all on what? Gold, silver, always. That was their major focus. And yes, we are not talking about pirates and all. We are not talking about thugs who have just looted the other countries. That is a different story. Intention might be same for a trader also or a bandit also to get gold and silver. But that is not the illegal things we are talking about. A normal trader also used to think that they need to export the goods and services to the other countries, and in return they should collect the precious metals by increasing the reserves of gold and silver so that they become richer and richer in this process. And their belief is that more and more gold and silver a country accumulates, the richer it becomes. That was the view of mercantilists. And this view argues that trade is a zero-sum game. Zero-sum game means I win, you lose, or you win, I lose. One of us only will win, both will not win. So this can be called as a win-lose game. One will lose, one will win. Of course, who will win, who will lose, depends upon their respective powers. But they thought trade is a zero-sum game, which means one country's gain is always equal to the another country's loss. So if somebody has won, automatically means somebody has lost. That is a zero-sum game, what they thought the trade is. So that net change in the wealth or benefits among the participants is zero. total change in the wealth has not happened. Wealth is not actually created here much. Only it got exchanged from one person to another person. Earlier somebody had it, now it has moved to new person. Only it got exchanged. But the total wealth or benefits among the participants has not changed. Why? Because it is a zero sum game. Zero sum game. Win lose game. If one person winning, other person losing, and both are equal, the gain of one person is equal to the loss of other person. That is what the mercantilist view of international trade was. Naturally, it was a very simple, straightforward, not much complicated type of view, or primitive view, we can say. I win, you lose. If I am powerful, you win, I lose. If you are powerful, done. That is how they used to look at the world and trade as a zero sum game. That is a very old traditional theory of international trade, we can say, particularly coming from Europe. Mostly the traders who have been supported by the kings and queens of Europe. And just for information, because the topic of mercantilists has come, all these people like Vasco da Gama or Columbus, who are all these people who traveled around the world and even discovered new countries. Why they were going like that? Are they like very much interested in just going on the sea to discover new countries? Not necessarily. Originally, when Columbus started, he wanted to come to India through sea route. But accidentally, incidentally, he found America. That's what happened. But his target was not to go to America, because nobody knew there was something called America that time. So that was the situation. But why he was coming to India? Who sponsored his trip? Queen sponsored the trip. All these people used to get sponsorship from the kings and queens. They used to sponsor their trips so that they find new sea routes and they can increase the international trade by selling or increasing the exports and collecting the precious metals in return. Of course, they all knew that India definitely was one of the richest countries then. So they knew very well they can sell goods here and get precious metals in return, or even in some of the cases, certain things which are not available in those countries can be taken from India, is what their thought was. There were travelers earlier also, even Alexander came to India before Christ. But that was all from land route, not from sea route. So first time when Columbus wanted to come to India in sea route, he could not find it actually. Somehow he disappeared in the sea and maybe lost his route and found America in return. So one way we can say, America would not have been there if somebody never wanted to come to India through sea at all. America would have been there. I'm not telling that as a land it would not have been there. There were people who there also. Because this guy thought that was India, he called them Red Indians. Most of the Americans now don't know India is a different country. They think Indians means Red Indians. That much foolish they are. Some of them know, some of them don't know. So why they are called Red Indians? Because that person thought they are Indians. They thought. Because he came for that. But later, after some time only, they realized it is not India. It is something else. So what are the reasons? Later on, other people from the Europe went to America and almost killed the local old Red Indians and conquered it. And then now America is all with more power, wealth and all. It's a different history. But the point is, why all these things were happening? Why they were going on the trips? Are they like vacations? Just for fun they were all going? No, they were not going for fun. That was all trade. For trade only they started the trips. Again, not to conquer or something in the beginning. Later on, when they smelled something more, they started conquering also. But these type of expeditions were examples of the mercantilist view of international trade, where they wanted to export some goods and in return they wanted to get more and more gold and silver from other countries so that they become richer. All these people are examples of such kind of thought process, whether it is Vasco da Gama or Columbus, etc. Anyway, that was very old period. We are talking about at least 300, 400 years back. Now later on, there is a theory of absolute advantage which was proposed by Adam Smith, one of the father of the economics, we can say. So this guy, Adam Smith, said that international trade is not a zero-sum game. He is probably the first one to propose that international trade is not a zero-sum game. Earlier, these people thought, mercantilists, international trade is a zero-sum game. Adam Smith opined differently and he said, no, Baba, it is not a zero-sum game. Then he proposed this theory of absolute advantage. What this theory tells is, the absolute cost advantage theory points out that a country will specialize in the production and export of a commodity in which it has absolute cost advantage. Again, cost advantage is important here, not skill, not other things. That also matters. That was not taken into consideration here fully, though it is a limitation of the theory, but still we have to keep that apart. Basically, what makes a country getting an advantage over the other country so that it can export the goods to the other country is the absolute cost advantage, which is true even now also, actually speaking. Even now. Why China is able to do lot of exports when compared to the other countries in the world? Because of absolute cost advantage. Cost advantage is the biggest point there. And that is what Adam Smith also told. Any country which can have absolute cost advantage, it can specialize in the production and export of that commodity in which it has a absolute cost advantage. In other words, exchange of goods between the two countries will take place only if each of the two countries can produce one commodity at an absolutely lower production cost than the other country. If there are two countries, one country can produce one commodity at an absolutely lower cost than the other country and vice versa. Other country can produce at absolutely lower production cost compared with the original country. Then only there will be an exchange of goods between them, according to Adam Smith. Of course, which was later contradicted by the theory of comparative advantage. We'll come to that later. But before that, we have to understand absolute advantage is there for certain countries over the other countries because of cost advantage they have. And how this results in, where from this cost advantage comes? Is it magical, or are they blessed that they have absolute cost advantage? One country is blessed, one country is cursed. Is it like that? No. It is basically a result of division of labor and most importantly specialization. That is the biggest absolute cost advantage. Specialization, because people are experts of doing that. When you are an expert, you will take lesser time to do that. When you take lesser time to do that, that means the cost of that product becomes lesser. And another point here, we have to also understand how the value of any particular thing, and we are not talking about use value, we are talking about exchange value of any commodity will be there. What is the component that makes or adds value? That was told by Aristotle also, Karl Marx also, Adam Smith also, but all of them has only one thing, that is labor. Labor adds value to any natural resource that is available. Without that, there is no value for anything. What is the value of water in the river? Nothing. No exchange value. Nobody buys that. But what is the value of water in a mineral water bottle? 20 rupees, 10 rupees, whatever the price of the bottle may be. That is the exchange value. So, what is adding value to that? Human labor. Whether in the form of physical labor or in the form of the machines that are used. Machines are not again made in nature. Those were also made by humans only. And those machines required the use of other machines. Those machines were also made by humans only. So ultimately, for anything in the nature which is available free of cost to everybody, to a something which is now valued at a price, what is getting that price is the question. That was the biggest almost secret or mystery to the human kind. What gets this value? What is this exchange value? How is it determined? That is simply labor. is what most of the traditional or not really traditional, but yeah, classical, whatever the name we can give them, economists have told. Philosophers like Aristotle told that, and then Adam Smith in this theory also used the same logic. When you take lesser time to manufacture a commodity because of your specialization, that means the cost of that commodity is lesser. If you take more time to manufacture a commodity, then the cost of that commodity is higher. Simple. That is the logic that Adam Smith has used. And some country will have an absolute cost advantage on the other country because of their specialization in some kind of product. If it is the situation, then only there will be international trade according to Adam Smith. If not, there will not be international trade. There is no need of international trade according to him. But will there be definitely some specialization and division of labor? Yes. Will there be differences in the cost of production of the same commodity in different countries? Yes. So naturally international trade also is inevitable according to Adam Smith, and that is good also. And that gives benefit to both the countries. So one more point you have to understand. What these people, mercantilists, have told, it is a win-lose scenario. Now what Adam Smith is telling, no boss, it is not a win-lose scenario, it is a win-win scenario. Both will win. It is advantageous to both of them if they indulge in international trade, if they exchange the commodities and services among them, other countries, then they will also get advantage, others also will get advantage according to Adam Smith, because international trade is not a zero-sum game. That is the theory of absolute advantage. Let us take this example for understanding the theory of absolute advantage as proposed by Adam Smith. Let us take this first situation. Normally, no international trade. Normally, this is what is the fact. Again, fact does not mean reality. We are looking at an example. Let us say the hours of work which are necessary to produce 1 unit of cloth or 1 unit of wine. What is that 1 unit? What is that 1 unit? We don't need to know. Some unit of cloth, 1 unit of wine, let us say. Let us say in UK, if cloth is manufactured, they will take 80 hours to manufacture 1 unit of cloth. And they will take 100 hours to manufacture 1 unit of wine. UK will take that example. Let us say Portugal will take 120 hours to manufacture 1 unit of cloth, 90 hours to manufacture 1 unit of wine. This is the reality of two countries. Let us say it is an example. So what Adam Smith says is, in the absence of trade, each country produces 1 unit of cloth and 1 unit of wine. That means a combined production of 2 units of cloth and 2 units of wine only will be done, because UK will produce 80 hours and 100 hours they will work. Then they will produce 1 unit of cloth, 1 unit of wine. Same way Portugal will also produce 1 unit of cloth, 1 unit of wine. Total units of cloth is 2, total units of wine is also 2 in the entire world if you see. And how many units of cloth are there in UK? 1, because they worked 80 hours. Portugal worked 120 hours to get the 1 unit of cloth only. So each of them produced ultimately 2 units of cloth and 2 units of wine put together. That is one. When the trade is not there, international trade is not there. Now let us see what if the international trade happens when the hours of work are committed after the specialization. Now before that, let us understand who has absolute advantage. UK is taking 80 hours to manufacture cloth. Portugal is taking 120 hours to manufacture cloth. So who has absolute advantage when it comes to cloth? UK. Wine, if you see, as a product, as per the example given in Wikipedia, UK has to take 100 hours to produce one unit of wine. Portugal will take 90 hours only to produce 1 unit of wine. So that means who has absolute advantage in manufacturing wine? Portugal. So simply speaking, what is the choice? What UK should manufacture? It should not even manufacture wine, it will only go for cloth. Then what happens? Whatever the total number of hours it has, entire 180 hours, it will put on cloth only. It will not manufacture wine at all. On the contrary, Portugal will put on entire units or entire hours of 120 plus 90 in manufacture of wine only. It will not manufacture cloth at all. So if the England or UK commits all of its labor, 80 plus 100, for the production of cloth, 180 hours it has committed. How much cloth it can produce? Take that. 180 hours. For manufacturing 1 unit, it takes 80 hours. That means 180 hours, how many units it can produce? 180 divided by 80, 2.25 units of cloth it can produce with the same 180 hours. On the other side, same way, Portugal committed 90 plus 120, 210 hours total in the manufacture of wine. For 1 unit of wine, it takes 90 hours. 210 hours actually worked will give how many units of wine? 2.33 units of wine. Without trade, both of them could produce only 2 units of cloth and 2 units of wine. With trade, UK could produce 2.25 units of cloth and Portugal could produce 2.33 units of wine. Then they can exchange them. That is what is international trade. And what happened to the entire world production? In the combined total production, if you see, there is much higher than the total production of each good had there been no specialization. Earlier only 2 units of cloth, 2 units of wine was produced without international trade. Now there is an additional production of 0.25 units of cloth and an additional production of 0.33 units of wine just because of international trade, nothing else. So is it not good proposition? Definitely yes. It is a win-win proposition for both of them. So according to Adam Smith, according to the theory of this absolute cost advantage or absolute advantage, country should produce that commodity only where it has absolute cost advantage over the other country. In this example, UK has absolute cost advantage over Portugal in terms of cloth, in that product only. Whereas Portugal has absolute cost advantage over UK in the manufacturing of wine. So, UK should manufacture cloth, Portugal should manufacture wine, and then they exchange. That is good for the entire world, because the output, if you see the total worldwide, or in this total 2 countries put together, now with the trade, output is higher than as it would have been without the trade. Why to waste time on certain thing where we don't have to? That is the simple logic. And with that, Adam Smith told countries should specialize certain things and they should produce only that. And whatever the countries are having specialization in one product, they will export those goods and they will import the goods from other countries which specialize in some other goods. That is how entire world can get a better scenario, good economic prosperity according to Adam Smith. That is the theory of absolute advantage. And question was asked in the examinations earlier, just for understanding purposes. Read this carefully. The table given below shows the number of labor hours required to produce sugar and rice. So in 2 countries, X and Y, whatever the countries they are. Look at the data carefully. Not necessarily the data will be coming according to our whims and fancies. According to data, we have to understand. For manufacturing 1 unit of sugar, country X takes 2 hours. For manufacturing 1 unit of rice, country X takes 4 hours. Same way for manufacturing 1 unit of sugar, Y takes 5 hours. And for manufacturing 1 unit of rice, Y takes 2.5 hours. First question is, compute the productivity of labor in both the countries in respect of both the commodities. Productivity. Productivity is simply output by input. What is output? 1 unit of sugar. Input how much for country X? 2 hours. 1 by 2. That means 0.5 is the productivity here. 1 by 5. 0.2 is the productivity here. 1 by 4. 0.25 is the productivity here. 1 by 2.5. 0.4 is the productivity here. That is the answer for first question. 1 mark only for all this. Second question. Which country has absolute advantage in production of sugar? You can see that. Only sugar you look at it. Only sugar. Productivity of country X is 0.5. Productivity of country Y is 0.2. Which country has absolute cost advantage? Naturally, country X has cost advantage because for manufacturing 1 unit of sugar, it is only taking 2 hours. Y would have taken 5 hours. Who is better in the manufacturing sugar? Country X. So simply, who has absolute cost advantage in production of sugar? Answer is country X. Third question. Which country has absolute cost advantage or advantage in production of rice? Look at productivity, that is enough. 0.25 is the productivity for X, 0.4 is the productivity for Y. Naturally, Y has absolute advantage. If you look at other side, 1 unit of rice is taking 4 hours by country X. It is taking only 2.5 hours by country Y. So country Y is more efficient and productive when it comes to production of rice. So who is having absolute advantage in production of rice? Y is having absolute advantage in production of rice. That question was given in past exams. Understanding the theory of absolute advantage is very, very important from this particular unit. Once we understand the theory of absolute advantage, then we have to move on to the theory of comparative advantage. This was proposed by Ricardo. This is a Ricardian theory and classical theory of comparative advantage that itself happened in 1817, long back. But very important theory in the history of international trade. So what this comparative advantage theory states is, even if one nation is less efficient than the other nation in the production of all commodities, there is still scope for mutually beneficial trade. When you say one nation is less efficient than the other nation, that means one nation is having absolute disadvantage with respect to other nation. When compared with other nation, one nation is having absolute disadvantage, not advantage. One country is less efficient than the other country in all respects. What was the problem with this was, earlier, theory of absolute advantage, always one country had absolute advantage over the other. For cloth, UK was good. For wine, Portugal was good. Then only this theory holds good. So what if Portugal is bad, even in cloth also and wine also then? Or what if UK is bad, worse than Portugal, in cloth also, wine also then? Then this theory has no answers. That is where we need the Ricardian theory of comparative advantage. Even then, there is a possibility for mutually beneficial trade according to Ricardo. So you don't have to look at the absolute advantage. Even if there is a comparative advantage also, that is enough. Even if one nation is completely less efficient than the other nation in all the production of commodities, any commodity, still there is a possibility for mutually beneficial trade. What is this magic? How this works? That works like this. The first nation means the one which is less efficient, that should specialize in the production and export of the commodity in which its absolute disadvantage is smaller. So first thing first we have to understand, one country is always at absolute disadvantage than the other country. Absolutely speaking, one country is always disadvantageous to other country. Now what Ricardo is saying, okay boss, disadvantage is there, but disadvantage is not same, na? Maybe disadvantage is smaller in one commodity, disadvantage is bigger in another commodity. What he says is, you manufacture and export that commodity where your absolute disadvantage is smaller. That he calls as the commodity of comparative advantage. Absolute disadvantage, but comparative advantage. Why? Because the absolute disadvantage is smaller compared with other commodity where the absolute disadvantage is greater. And a commodity where absolute disadvantage is greater, that commodity is called as comparative disadvantage also. When both are disadvantages, absolute disadvantage, comparative disadvantage, then better to import that commodity. So which commodity has to be exported? The one where our absolute disadvantage is smaller or comparative advantage is there in that. Such commodity should be exported, and the other commodity where the absolute disadvantage is greater, which causes comparative disadvantage also, should be imported. That is called the theory of comparative advantage. Let us take another example for understanding this. Ricardian theory of comparative advantage. Same type of situation let us take here, similar to the earlier one what we have taken. But numbers will change naturally. Situation is different now. Countries are same, products are same, the numbers will change. Now, cloth and wine, England, Portugal, same countries, but England can manufacture 1 unit of cloth in 100 hours. Portugal can manufacture in 90 hours only. England can manufacture 1 unit of wine in 120 hours. Portugal can manufacture in 80 hours only. The point is, England is always at a disadvantageous position, absolutely speaking. Portugal is fantastic, England is down, bad. It is absolutely speaking, it is at a disadvantageous position. If this is the situation, our Adam Smith theory flop. It will not work. It will not work at all. Because absolute disadvantage is only there for England. There is no absolute advantage at all. Then the theory of absolute advantage will not work. Now the theory of comparative advantage will work. Let us see how it works. Let us take first thing. In the absence of trade, England requires total how many hours? 220 hours, because it needs 1 unit of cloth, 1 unit of wine, let us say, to both produce and consume 1 unit each of cloth and wine. And Portuguese requires 90 plus 80, only 170 hours in order to manufacture 1 unit of cloth and 1 unit of wine, same quantities. England requires 220 hours, Portugal requires 170 hours. That is from the data which is available. Now, one thing for sure, of course, Portugal is more efficient than England in both products. Let us look at only England. Within England, England is better off what? Comparatively, compared with wine, England is more efficient in producing cloth, because to manufacture 1 unit of wine, it needed 120 hours, but it can produce 1 unit of cloth in 100 hours only. So, comparatively, without comparing with Portugal, only within England, if you compare, England is good in what, at least, out of cloth and wine? In cloth, because it can produce cloth with lesser number of hours compared with wine. And on the other side, if you see Portugal, it is within Portugal, if you see, it is better in manufacturing wine, more efficient in producing wine than cloth. So, absolutely speaking, definitely England is inefficient when compared with Portugal on both products. But relatively speaking, within England, it is better off manufacturing cloth, whereas within Portugal, it is better off manufacturing wine, since these countries are respectively good at manufacturing cloth and wine within themselves. So, what Ricardo says is, because each of the countries is specializing in the goods for which it has a comparative advantage, then the global production of both the goods increases. Now, from this, what England would have decided? It would have decided to go for entire 220 hours to manufacture cloth only, because that is having comparative advantage. England is having comparative advantage. So, 220 hours it will spend on cloth only. That means how many units of cloth it can manufacture? 2.2 units of cloth it can manufacture. Same way, Portugal will spend entire 170 hours on wine only. That means how many units of wine it can manufacture? It can manufacture 2.125 units of wine it can manufacture. Still higher than earlier, though absolutely speaking, England could manufacture only 2 units of both put together cloth and wine, and 2 units of put together cloth and wine. Now, total world will produce 2.2 units of cloth and 2.125 units of wine, which means still there is an advantage to the entire world because of international trade. But this is not because England has some absolute advantage over Portugal, nor Portugal has, of course, Portugal has absolute advantage against England, but England does not have absolute advantage against Portugal. But at least relative advantage it has when it comes to the commodity called cloth in this example. So, in this example, particularly if England spends 220 labor hours, it can produce 2.2 units of cloth. Portugal can spend 170 hours and can produce 2.125 units of wine, which is higher than the original plan of no trade. When there is no trade, 2 units of cloth, 2 units of wine only would have been produced with the same time, using the same time by both the countries. Now, 2.2 units of cloth and 2.125 units of wine can be still produced, which is more than the original plan, according to the theory of comparative advantage. Still, even though there is no absolute advantage by one country on the other country, there is a possibility of applying the theory of comparative advantage, with which the international trade will add value to the global, you can say, economy as a whole. That is what is the theory of comparative advantage in a nutshell with example. Now, moving on to another theory, also important one, that is called modern theory of trade, or these names also you should remember. Heckscher-Ohlin theory, HO theory that is called. Sometimes Heckscher-Ohlin-Samuelson theory also it is called. So, HO theory or HOS theory, Heckscher-Ohlin theory, also called factor endowment theory of trade, factor endowment theory, or MTT, that is modern theory of trade. All these are names of the same theory. It is a very important theory of international trade, that is for sure. what it states is that comparative advantage in the cost of production is explained exclusively by the differences in the factor endowments of the nations. Means, okay, we know that comparative advantage is there of one country over the other country. This theory explains why that happens. Why that comparative advantage in the cost of production will be there for one country over and above the other countries. That happens because of the differences in the factor endowments of the nations. What is the cause of the difference in the relative prices of the goods? That is the difference in the amount of factor endowments like capital and labor between the two countries. Simply speaking, endowments means this is the application of various resources within a country. For example, if you say the country is exporting country, how much it exports depends upon its resource endowment. Whether the country is a capital abundant country or a labor abundant country. Majorly, there might be so many factors actually. Factor endowment means factors of production, utilization, we can say. So, factors of production will be generally what? Land, labor, capital, organization. Land is anyway almost more or less the same. That is not going to have a huge impact. But definitely, what are the two things that will have a huge impact? Capital and labor. Certain countries may be capital abundant countries, certain other countries may be labor abundant countries. So, simple logic is, according to the modern theory of trade, the country which is having a capital abundancy, it will produce and export capital intensive goods relatively more cheaply than the other country. Naturally, it will produce and export capital intensive goods. Which are countries, what type of countries are going to do that? The ones which are capital intensive countries. They will produce and export capital intensive goods which require more mechanization and all. Likewise, a labor abundant country will produce and export labor intensive goods relatively more cheaply than another country. Clear example we can take. Let us say manufacturing organizations throughout the world, okay, keeping China as a factory apart, mostly will be in which countries? In the developed countries, mostly in Europe or America. Those are capital intensive countries because capital is abundant there. Capital abundant countries are developed countries in general. So what they will manufacture and export? Mostly the capital intensive goods. And countries like India will give labor intensive goods relatively more cheaply, like software engineers. That is exactly the advantage what India has got in that particular sector. Why? Because it is supplying the labor at a cheaper price than many other countries. For a software engineer in America, imagine, let us say, a fresh software engineer has to be paid some $70,000 per annum. In India, if you pay $10,000 also, he'll be like jumping with joy. That's like huge amount for them. We're still talking about like 7 lakhs package, 6 lakhs package. Fresh software engineers don't get that much also. So means what? Because we are labor abundant country in that field, we could produce and export the labor intensive goods relatively cheaply than the other countries. That is one of the reasons why our software companies like Infosys, TCS or Wipro, HCL, how these are all so famous, Cognizant Technologies, CTS, huge companies, these are all in the world scenario. How? Because that is labor intensive goods. It is not goods, it is services. Goods include services. That industry itself is labor intensive in that segment. This is not something like manufacturing of iPhones or manufacturing of laptops or some other product, pencils, pens. That all could be capital intensive. We are not good in that really much. We are not producing that cheaply also, because that is not our, we can say, strength. Our strength is people. That is why we are labor abundant country. So we are better in exporting labor intensive goods naturally, relatively more cheaply than any other country. So our exports will be more competitive and our services will be more taken by other countries also. I am not talking still about the skills and knowledge and all. That is also part of it, no doubt in that. But even just taking bluntly the cost of an Indian software engineer is almost like 1/10 of the cost of a American software engineer, and same applies to many other services where our labor abundancy has caused labor intensive industries. Service sector is more labor intensive. We need to understand that. That industry has grown much here because of that. Of course, that does not mean manufacturing is not labor intensive. That could be capital intensive also, labor intensive also. Could be. But service sector has to be labor intensive only mostly. A call center, if it is required, automatic machines, IVRS, any things you may have, but still if a customer wants to talk to an executive, he has to talk to a human being only, no? That human being should be sitting somewhere and talking, right? And where is that human being for entire world mostly so far? In India. Somebody in America purchasing some GE product, working in the night, taking that call, maybe little bit using American accent and all. That's all fine. And they talk to them as if like they're in America, and the American people are okay with that. So the point is, labor intensive industries like that require more labor, and we having so many people available who can speak English, who can create or code, create some codes for the softwares, who can write programs, or who can do basic things like communication and maintenance of various softwares. All these things we are able to do well because naturally we have a labor abundant country. So simple logic, as modern theory of trade says, any country which is capital abundant, it will produce and export capital intensive goods relatively more cheaply than any other country, and similarly any labor abundant country will produce and export labor intensive goods more relatively cheaply than other countries. So simply ultimately what matters according to this theory, HOS theory or Heckscher-Ohlin theory or factor endowment theory, is it is all about the abundancy of factors in one country when compared with other countries, which creates such comparative advantage. According to them, factors of production are the key. Then the same people have continued their theory with factor price equalization theory also. Of course, in the absence of foreign trade, it is quite likely that factor prices are different in different countries. They are different. In different countries, factor prices are completely different. But what they say is, if the international trade happens high level, then it equalizes the prices of factors of production also. That means what? The comparative advantage, whatever is there so far, because of this lesser cost of production due to one factor being more abundantly available in one country, will go eventually. Has it gone in Indian context? No. We still have that factor price advantage, particularly in software sector. But they say is not. What they say is, boss, this is not permanent. Over a period of time, the international trade equalizes the prices of factors of production, is what they say. In other words, the wages of the homogeneous labor, similar type of labor, and returns to the homogeneous capital will be same in all those nations which engage in trading. Over a period of time, it happens as they say. For this, there is no proof yet. We cannot say completely with confidence that this happens at every level. But at a broader level, if you see, the high level salaries, let us say CEO salary in America or a CEO salary in India, is not much different. There is difference still, but not much different. Over a period of time, middle level and high level jobs will have more or less the similar type of pay. That is where the homogeneous labor will come into picture. And returns to the homogeneous capital also will be more or less same in all the nations. Again, not true. Not necessarily true. But there will be equalization or movement towards equilibrium, that is for sure. Whenever we say equilibrium, equalization, we should not think that it will happen tomorrow or it will happen now. It will never happen exactly. It will swing like that. While swinging, ultimately there is somewhere where there is equilibrium or where that equalizes. That's what we should understand. But as per theory, the differences cannot exist. The differences in the cost of the factors of production cannot exist if international trade is there. Ultimately, the factor costs of all countries will become one and the same. That's what this factor price equalization theorem says. And it not only talks about inputs, it also talks about if the prices of the outputs of the goods are equalized between the countries engaged in free trade, then the prices of the input factors will also be equalized. Is there any example for outputs of the goods being equalized? Yes. Crude prices, for example, in the world, are they same or not throughout the world? Yes. There is no separate crude price for China, separate crude price for America. Crude prices are internationally traded. Gold prices, for example, they are all internationally same. International prices are same. That means output of the goods are priced same. What according to them is, if this happens first, automatically that leads to input factors also being equalized. The cost or prices of the input factors also will become equalized, is what they say. But once again, we have to keep in mind, this is theory. You have to write this. If this question comes, should not expect that this will happen in real world. Now we can see that. No, we cannot see that. Differences will exist in the world. Equalization and all are dreams. They will not happen actually. American person working in, let us say, McDonald's restaurant will get $10, $12 per hour. Even least $10 per hour he will get. That is per hour. He will not get even per day in India, $10. He will get half of that. Maybe he will get $5 only per day. So where is equalization? No equalization. Product output may be already same. Maybe. Not necessarily, but maybe same. Maybe the same burger is sold at $1.2 there. Maybe same burger is sold at say 109 rupees, something like here. Maybe it is similar. Output prices already happened. For many products it has happened. Actually, because we have taken McDonald's, that is one more interesting thing, that there is an exchange rate called McDonald's rate, which just takes the prices of the same burger across the country, and that itself will be taken as exchange rates between the currencies of those countries. So they are almost equalized, not exactly equal, but almost equalized. But is it the salaries of the worker also equalized? No, that is not happened. So theoretically only this factor price equalization works. Practically, for at least developing countries like India, we cannot see all those dreams come true in our reality. But will it happen over a period of time according to them? Yes. And let us hope it will happen in future also. What it says is, when the output of the prices of the output of the goods are going to be equalized between countries which are engaged in free trade, over a period of time the price of input factors also will be equalized. That is called factor price equalization. That automatically means also what? Trade in goods is a perfect substitute for trade in factors also. These are all very great ideals, but they are not. Trade in goods can happen just like that. Substitute for trade in factors perfectly. How it will happen? Indian wants to go to America, 100 restrictions are there. Visa itself they will not give. They will come just like that. Of course, not that easy to come to India also. But point is, these are things which will not always happen for all factors. Maybe yes, money possible. For a factor like capital, this theory can be at least to some extent understood. And that is true also. The rates of return on the capital will be more or less same throughout the world if the international trade is existing almost very, you can say, big level. That is true. Imagine if in US the rate of return that is expected is 2%. In India, let us say if it is 10%, the difference is because of inflation. That means if you take real returns, maybe more or less both of them are giving around 2.5% return India is giving, maybe 1.8% return US is giving. So not much different, almost similar. But if you look at 10 versus 2, it looks like too much difference. No. At a broader level, worldwide market level, capital returns equalization is more or less going to work. Again, we see that in the chapter of currencies. That is to some extent okay. Labor being related to human beings, there we cannot say automatically the prices of input factors like labor will be equalized practically, but still as a theory, this factor price equalization theory proposes that with the international trade, the prices of factors of production will be eventually equalized throughout the world, and trade in the goods is a perfect substitute for trade in factors, and thus foreign trade eliminates the factor price differentials. Because factor prices are different in one country to another country, normally that is factor price differentials, and the foreign trade eliminates such differentials according to factor price equalization theory, which is a continuation of the factor endowment theory only. This is also proposed by Heckscher and Ohlin only. It is a continuation. Both are same, but if this only factor endowment theory is asked, we have to write the original theory or modern theory of trade, what we looked at. If factor price equalization is the question that is asked, we have to write this. Next, moving on to the new trade theory, which is the last theory in this theories of international trade, NTT we can call it. It is the latest entrant into this list of theories, which explains the rising proportion of the world trade in the developed world and bigger developing economies. Like we have BRICS is one of the examples. BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. So the trade that happens among the developed world and bigger developing economies which trade in similar products, that is rising, that is a rising proportion, and these countries constitute more than 50% of the world trade. That's what this new trade theory says. And answer is, question is how this much rising proportion of world trade is happening between the developed world and bigger developing economies. Because of what factors this trade is increasing? According to the new trade theory, two major factors. One is economies of scale, second one is network effects. These two words exactly you should write for this question. New trade theory is talking about two things. There will be substantial economies of scale, and second is network effects. Because of that, it pays to export and sell in another country. It is good to export and sell in another country because of these two things. Because if you manufacture only for yourselves, then you have to manufacture at a lesser scale. If you are manufacturing for the entire world, if you have orders from 40 different countries, naturally your scale will go up. That will reduce your overall cost. That means you will be able to sell also at a lower prices. You can become more and more competitive. That is why economies of scale is the biggest reason for world trade according to new trade theory, which is real also. And live example, all world traditional things are all gone. Biggest example of economies of scale is naturally this People's Republic of China, as the name indicates, that is China. Economies of scale only is the reason why they could become almost economically powerful in this world. That is a living example what we can see in the current world. Then network effects also will work according to this new trade theory. Network effect is also called as bandwagon effect. Bandwagon effect. That is also true. You look at mobile phones. Mobiles, bandwagon effect only. One country has started mobile phones usage. Other country wants it. That country started. Other country wants it. Our neighbor started using mobile phone. We want it. Somebody started using Netflix. We want to use it also. Somebody started using some multiplexes type of cinema theaters. We wanted them also. Why you want, sir? You already have so many cinema theaters. Why do you want multiplexes first of all in India? What is the reason, logic behind it? Nobody knows. Why do you need malls? Why do we need them? Already so many shops are there around us. Was there like any requirement for malls and multiplexes in India? What was the need of that? I mean, literally speaking, business wise, no need of that. Bandwagon effect, nothing. Network effects. Because America has it, Dubai has it, Singapore has it, China, Shanghai has it, we should also have it. That's all. Other than that, there is no big real importance of that. So what happens? Because of that, world trade increases. Because of that, the world trade is on the rise. Because so much of consumerism, so much of buying things. We see imported furniture. Furniture is good. It should be good, comfortable, fine. But now, almost from the past like 5 to 10 years, the fashion is imported furniture. Nobody wants local furniture. All the carpenters who used to literally carve and make good furniture, they are there, but they don't have that much of orders like earlier. Because again, network effect. iPhone is the biggest example of network effect. Why somebody wants an iPhone, nobody can answer so far. The only answer is somebody else has it. Other than that, I have asked so many people, some of my friends also, why iPhone? A lot of people don't even know what are the advantages of that also. They say, no idea, because maybe it's required, maybe we need to have that. I am a chartered accountant, I should use iPhone. Is there any rule that you are a CA means, or you are a software engineer means, or you are somebody who is earning good means, you have to use iPhone? Is there anything like that? Mobile is mobile, any mobile will do. Why that? Nothing. Simple funda, psychological bandwagon effect. Somebody used it, I should use it. Somebody has it, I should have it. Because of this only world trade increases. That's what new trade theory says, which is reality. We can see this. And because of all this, some countries will take this advantage and they will dominate the market. We are seeing that also. And the market takes the form of a monopolistic competition. It will not be a monopoly, it will not be a competition also, but it will be a monopolistic competition. We always talk about Samsung versus iPhone versus Xiaomi versus whatever other Huawei and all that in mobile phones now. Earlier, maybe around 10 years back, we used to talk about BlackBerry versus Nokia versus Motorola. Names changed, but competition was similar, monopolistic competition. And why that happens? How one country or these countries are going to have increased world trade day after day, day after day, because of two major reasons. One is economies of scale, second one is network effects. Because of economies of scale, China could sell us mosquito bats also, it could sell us whatnot, even from staples, even from toothpicks, it is manufacturing and selling us. Economies of scale, nothing else. Other than that, there is no big reason why any other country has to import from China. So, these things have created economies of scale one side, bandwagon effect or network effect on the other side, created a huge world trade in the current scenario of the earth. But of course, most of this is happening among which countries? 50% of that is happening in the developed world and bigger developing countries like big BRICS. And that too trading in similar products. That is the point. There is no like huge difference between one product and another product. Phone is phone. It will have more or less the same features. Some specialized products are not there. Products are more or less the same, but they are having different competition on the basis of their traits or advertising tactics, brand names what they created. Brand is playing a huge role. What will be the big difference between Coca-Cola and Pepsi? Of course, it is not a monopolistic competition. It is a duopoly or a different scenario. But still, just for example, no big difference. What will be the big difference in the quality of the products like Nike, Adidas, Puma, Fila, etc.? Maybe they are all getting manufactured in the same factory also. Quite possible. Just brand is, just label is changed. But still, people are okay with that. Why? Bandwagon effect, network effect. So people want to buy more and more. So much goods around us, services around us. We need to take them. So we have to just follow that. Everybody just follows that. Intentionally, unintentionally, we are a part of that. Everybody has to use them, and the services also grow tremendously. Facebook, WhatsApp, all are examples of network effects. And now, because of technology, network effects are much more highest actually, ever in the human history. Somebody from UK can just like that call me and talk to me without almost any cost, which was impossible to imagine maybe 10 years back also. But these are all things happening, and that is one of the things which is guiding and which is actually increasing also the international trade or world trade. That is called new trade theory. The two major things you have to write about here is economies of scale and network effects. And what is the shape of the market it is taking because of that is monopolistic competition. Almost similar products are sold by many people, and only few those people will dominate the top people will dominate the entire market. We can see that in the entire world scenario. Even taking our field also, accountancy or audit or consulting, we call big four: PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, Ernst and Young, Deloitte. That's all. World domination happens because of only these four firms. Okay, there are hundreds of other firms and other small individual chartered accountants, thousands of them. That's a different story. But domination by whom? By only few players. Why? Majorly, once again, same network effects. Network effects. That is how this new trade theory is actually telling what is happening around us now. Of course, other theories are very important in terms of knowing them and understanding them from examination point of view. Reality of the current world is what is new trade theory, which tells us the characteristics of the current day's scenario in the field of international trade, which is as a result of economies of scale and network effects, creating monopolistic competition and allowing some countries to take advantage and dominate the markets in certain areas. China dominating on the production side, America dominating on the technology side, let us say India, if not dominating, at least contributing from the labor side of supplying many software and other professionals to the world. Like that, everybody has their own advantages and trying to dominate the market in their own ways. That is the new trade theory, which is also one of the very important and contemporary theories in this list of theories related to international trade. With that, we can conclude this session of the theories of international trade, and we'll continue this discussion with another unit, which is unit 2 in chapter 4 in the next session. Till then, take care. Bye bye. Thank you very much.